The day started out as a hectic one when the alarm clock failed to wake my wife and me. It seems there was a power outage during the night, and we had to rush to make it to work on time. Well, she had to rush. I didn't have to be at work until 9 a.m., and it was only a 15-minute drive for me. My wife likes to check her email in the morning before she leaves for work, but she was in such a hurry she forgot to shut down her computer. So, when I was about to turn it off, I saw an email that she had received a few days ago. The subject line read "Aloha to a great time." Needless to say, I opened it and was immediately crushed to find out that my wife was planning to fly off to Hawaii with another guy while I would be on a 2-week business trip. This was a kick to my gut and a blow to my hopes for a promotion. Now, let me give you some background. My wife Kathy and I met through mutual friends over 12 years ago who thought we'd be a good match. As it turned out, we were both into fitness and a healthy lifestyle. She was a yoga instructor and personal trainer, while I worked in marketing for a mid-sized company with dreams of expansion. I love the outdoors, so any chance I get, you'll find me hiking, mountain biking, running, or doing other outdoor activities. We shared many other interests and looked good together. Kathy stands 5 feet 6 inches with long flowing brown hair, brown eyes, and of course, a killer body. I'm 6 feet 3 inches with blonde hair, blue eyes, and an athletic build. Was it love at first sight? No, but we grew to be good friends, and later, the romance began slowly. It took a couple of years, but we did marry, and I thought we were happy. For the longest time, I knew I was, but after reading this email, I knew our marriage was in serious trouble. It seems this guy Gary and she had been planning this romantic getaway for some time. She knew about my upcoming business trip, which was a huge opportunity for me and the company. I was going to be away for 2 weeks with a few associates to try to land several big accounts. If I could make this happen, it would mean a promotion and a nice pay increase. But now, as I stared at this email, that was the last thing on my mind. I started to go through her other emails to find out more about this Gary. It seemed she had saved all her emails from him in a folder called Trips. How convenient for me. You see, Kathy isn't computer savvy, but I use computers daily, so I knew my way around. It became very clear she had been seeing this guy for the last 6 months. But why? I couldn't think of any obvious signs that she was unhappy. Our sex life was great, and we enjoyed each other's company. What pushed her into the arms of another man? My head was spinning, and I needed to get to work. But before I left, I copied all the saved emails to a thumb drive so I could read them later and gather more information about Gary, and maybe even get some insight into why she was doing this. Finally shutting off her computer, I rushed off to work. My thoughts were consumed with her and this Gary. As I was getting over the shock of this discovery, my anger started to build, and I wanted revenge on an epic scale. Now, I am not a violent man, nor do I believe in revenge, but this was different. This infidelity on her part was not something I could forgive. I began to wonder where and when this all started, but quickly decided I didn't need to know. What I did want to know was more about Gary and what I could do to ruin his life. I didn't want him dead or seriously injured, although those thoughts did cross my mind. No, I wanted them both to suffer a very public humiliation. But what and how still needed to be worked out. I had 6 weeks to figure something out. So, when I got to work, I shut the door to my office and brainstormed. What I needed was more information, not only on Gary but also the details of their trip. Then an idea started to form on how I could ruin their trip before they even left the ground and expose their affair in such a way that she would not be able to deny it. It was a risky plan, but it would make her pay in the end. As the day went on, I did some actual work but also kept thinking about my plan. When it was time to head home, I stayed in my office for over an hour, listing out what I needed and how to go about getting those items. I also made a list of the dangers involved in what I was planning. If this backfired or was discovered, it could mean jail time for me. But I felt that risk was worth it. Now, to gather more information on Gary, I needed access to Kathy's email and computer. So, I went online to see if I could download software to get her passwords to her computer and email account, but then I stopped. If this was going to work, I couldn't leave a paper trail or an electronic one either. You see, if there were to be any type of investigation, I didn't want anyone to find out I was involved. With that in mind, I had to figure out how to get what I needed in such a way that it could not be traced back to me. Over the next few days, I purchased a few throwaway cell phones from different stores, each 30 miles or more outside of town, all with cash. Along with that, I bought a small laptop that I could use at places offering free Wi-Fi, so my activities couldn't be linked to work or home. I also bought a few wireless video cameras and some bugs to place around the house, in the hope that if she brought this guy into our bed for some extramarital fun, they might talk about their upcoming trip and provide me with the much-needed information. As time passed, I tried to act as normal as possible around my wife, so she wouldn't suspect me of being onto her affair. That was hard, but over the next few weeks, it became natural to look at her and smile a loving smile while I thought of her with another guy. I think I missed my calling. I should have been an actor. During this time, I reached out to some old friends using one of the phones I bought, so there could be no possible link made to me or the persons I was calling. My first call was to a college friend whom I hadn't spoken to since graduating over 14 years ago. Steve was a party animal back in the day and had been the go-to guy if you needed something to liven up the evening. "Steve, it's Hank. How have you been, man?" At first, Steve didn't remember, but after some reminders of those parties in college, it finally clicked. "Hey, Hank." "Yeah, now I remember. Boy, those were the days, my friend. What have you been up to?" I gave him a brief rundown of my life after college. He, in turn, told me things hadn't turned out as he had hoped but was doing okay. "So, what do I owe the pleasure of your call?" he asked. "It wasn't just to reminisce about the good old days," I replied. "I need some help and was hoping you might be able to provide it. I was thinking we could meet for lunch and talk about it. What do you say?" He hesitated for a moment. "You sure?" "Anything for an old college buddy." We made plans to meet at a place far from my workplace but close to his, in a few days. I was really hoping he could help me, as time was starting to run down, and I didn't know anyone else I could ask. I had also placed the cameras and bugs in the bedroom and living room, thinking those were the two most likely places they would talk and do other things. After the first week they were in place, when I checked, it showed me nothing. I thought maybe she was going to his place, as it might be too risky to come back here for their sex fest. But the following week was a different story. It seems she brought Gary back to our place late one morning, and they had sex in every imaginable position for just over 2 hours. It made me sick to watch, but I had to, just to see if they talked about their trip or gave up any more useful information. But nothing. The following week, I checked the cameras again and found they had returned, but not for sex. They just talked about their upcoming trip, which gave me the information I was looking for, their flight number and departure time. As I listened, I could hear the excitement in my wife's voice as they discussed their plans. I was more furious than ever. I even thought about killing them both, but dismissed that thought. I wanted them both to live a long and miserable existence. This revenge was going to last a lifetime and follow them to their graves. I had a dream that when my soon-to-be ex-wife was lying on her deathbed, old and gray, I would walk in, smile, lean over, and tell her how I had ruined her trip to Hawaii. I would stand up, smile down at her as she looked at me in shock, and then turn around and leave. I was now more determined than ever to make this work. But there was still one thing I needed to do, and that was going to be another risk I'd have to take. I finally found out more about Gary. He and my wife work at the same health club. He's a personal trainer. It seems he has a bad habit of betting other men's wives. Well, that's about to come to a very ugly end. He lives not far from the club in a small condo complex, so I decided to do a little surveillance. I took a day off from work, telling my boss I needed to take care of a few personal things before our business trip. I had purchased a digital camera with a powerful zoom and watched his place for a few hours. It wasn't anything special, just a small 2-bedroom complex, and it looked as if his neighbors were gone during the day for work. There were no security cameras, which was good for what I had planned for him. It needed to be done covertly. At the meeting with Steve, I was nervous about what I needed to ask him. This was the biggest risk of my whole plan, but if I could get what I needed, then it would be so worth it. I saw Steve come into the restaurant and waved him over to the table I was sitting at. It was far back, and the place was pretty quiet with only a dozen or so customers having a late lunch. He walked up and greeted me, "Long time no see, bro." Time had not been kind to Steve. He looked awful, as if he could have been an extra on the show The Walking Dead. I wanted to make this quick. If he couldn't help me, then I would need to look somewhere else for what I needed to buy. We started to talk about college and some of the epic parties Steve threw. The man was a party animal back then, but it had since caught up with him. He looked at least 15 years older than his real age. I needed to move things along, so I just came out and asked him point blank, "Steve, the reason I asked you here was to see if you were someone you know might help get me some party favors for a little private party I'll be throwing." I handed him a list. "Can you help me out? I'll gladly pay you for your time." Steve read the list first with a look of shock, but then a smile came across his face. "Sure, man, no problem. Sounds like it's going to be an awesome party, dude. Think you could invite an old college buddy along?" I smiled in relief. "Sure, no problem. Just get me what I asked for, and I'll let you know where and when the party will be." "Okay, cool, but I'm going to need some cash up front to get these items for you." I was prepared and handed him an envelope with several thousand in it. "Will this do?" "Man, you are planning a major blowout, aren't you? This is more than enough. When do you need this stuff?" I told him to meet me next week with the items and that if there was a problem or a delay, to call me. I then gave him the number to my new cell phone, and we left the restaurant soon after. It was now 2 weeks before my trip, and my wife and her lover were planning on flying out the following day after I left on my trip, so timing was crucial. I had met with Steve, and he was able to get me everything I had asked for. Now, all I had to do was place these items so they wouldn't be found until the time was right. 3 days before my trip, I went home early and checked my wife's suitcase. It was packed and ready to go for her trip, the cheating witch. So, I very carefully went into it and placed a few little surprises as a going-away gift. I made sure to hide them so if she were to unpack and then repack, she would never find them. She wasn't the one I wanted to find them anyway. Next came another risky venture, which involved breaking into Gary's place. I knew his work schedule, so that wasn't an issue. What was the issue was that I had never done anything like this before. I was able to purchase a lockpick set and a book on how to pick a lock, things you can buy on the internet. I had practiced on several locks at home and at work. I had gotten pretty good at it, so I had great hopes this part of the plan would work. It was early afternoon, so I told my boss I needed to take a long lunch. Soon, I found myself outside Gary's condo with my lockpick set in hand. I surprised myself as I was able to pick the lock in just over a minute and was inside his home. Speed was the key. I wanted to do what I came to do as quickly as possible and leave without a trace. I wore latex gloves and went straight to his bedroom, where I found his packed bag ready for a trip. As I had done with my wife's suitcase, I went through his and placed a few travel gifts that would certainly make this a memorable trip. Once finished, I moved to the kitchen and found a can of coffee. I pulled out a mixing bowl from one of his cupboards and emptied the coffee from the can into it. Then, I placed a few packets in the bottom of the can and filled it back up with the coffee, placing it back where I found it, making sure everything was as it should be. I left Gary's place and headed home. I had just one more thing to do. It was a couple of days before my trip, and I reached out to a friend of mine who I knew had a cousin that worked at the airport with the TSA. I also had all the information on the flight my wife and Gary were to take. It was now just a matter of getting the information into the right hands without letting anyone know where it came from. So, I reached out to my friend but had to be somewhat cryptic about how I came across this information. "Jack, I need to ask a favor, but you have to keep this information about who gave it to you a secret." I gave him details of the flight and Gary's name, but not my wife's. Jack said he would tell his cousin and handle it from there. I also removed all the cameras and bugs and disposed of them in a way so no one could find them. I also hid a few surprises in Kathy's car just to add to her woe. Now it was the day before my trip, and I thought I'd have a little fun at my wife's expense. As I came home from work, I walked into the house and sat down, acting upset. My wife looked at me. "What's wrong? Something happened at work?" "Oh, something happened all right. The clients we were supposed to meet just canceled the meetings, so now I won't be going on that trip, and the company won't get the opportunity to grow," I said with mock anger. I saw the shock and fear on her face. It was then I knew she was thinking of a way to get me to go on that trip so she and Gary could have their fun in Hawaii. "Can't they send you anyway and try to work things out with those clients?" I mean, you and your team have spent a lot of time and energy on this project. It seems such a shame to waste all of that hard work. This pissed me off to no end. How can you talk about shame? You have no shame, and you and Gary are going to pay. I looked at her and laughed. Just pulling your leg, honey. The trip is still on. Don't worry. There was a sign of great relief on her face, and then she smiled. You had me going there for a second. So, you all packed? Yeah, just need to add a few items to my carry-on, and I'll be ready to go. Hope you won't miss me too much while I'm gone. Do you have anything planned? Maybe a girls' night out or something? No, nothing. I'll be sitting here, just waiting for my loving husband to return. God, I almost laughed at that, but I was too angry. The next day, my wife drove me to the airport and dropped me off. I gave her a long, passionate kiss while my hand rubbed that sweet, tight palm of hers. It would be the last kiss I would ever give her, so I wanted it to be a memorable one. I met up with the rest of the group, and we boarded the flight. It was uneventful, and once we landed and had checked into the hotel, I called home using the hotel room phone. There was no answer, so I left a message. Honey, I did a really stupid thing. I left my phone in the cab and won't be able to call you until I get it returned or replaced. So, if you need to call me, leave a message at the front desk, and I'll be sure to call you later in the evening. I didn't forget my phone, I just wanted to have a valid excuse for not taking her calls. The next day came, and I made sure my phone was off and that no one could reach me while I was in meetings all day with clients. When I got back to the room, I checked but hadn't received any messages, so I turned on my phone and didn't find any messages from my wife or anyone else. Well, maybe they did get through security at the airport. The next day, the meetings went even better than the first ones, and we were back at the hotel early. There were several messages waiting for me on the phone in my hotel room. One was from my wife, another was from her father, and the third was from a DA agent, which brought a smile to my face. I then checked my cell phone and saw several messages waiting for me. I played the messages from the hotel phone. The first was from my wife, and she was crying. Baby, it's me. I'm in big trouble, and I really need you. Please come home now, please. After that, all I heard was crying. The next message was from my soon-to-be ex-father-in-law. Hank, your wife has been trying to get in touch with you. She's been arrested and needs you home now. Please call me when you can. The last message was from a DA agent. Sir, this is Agent DeFranco, and I would like to speak with you about your wife and her arrest on drug charges. He went on about where to reach him and a few other details. I was so happy, I couldn't stop smiling. But I had to put on a serious face for my coworkers. This had worked out perfectly so far, but I still needed to act surprised and shocked so no one would suspect I had anything to do with this. So, I contacted Ed, my boss, the following morning and told him I had a serious problem at home but didn't give out any details. He said that since the meetings were going so well, I could leave to take care of this emergency, but he wanted me back as soon as possible to ensure that we closed the deals with these clients. I caught the first plane back home, and as soon as I was on the ground, I pulled out my lost cell phone and called my father-in-law. What the hell is going on? I got your message, but I don't believe it. Kathy was arrested on drug charges? She doesn't do drugs. Where did this happen? At the health club? I knew exactly where it took place. No, she was traveling with a friend to Hawaii and was stopped at security where they found some illegal drugs on her and her friend, her father said in a low voice, as if embarrassed. Wait a minute, just wait. She told me she was going to be home, that she didn't have any plans. Who was this friend she was going to Hawaii with? I bet one of her girlfriends talked her into going and got her into all this mess. Her father hesitated for a moment. I know it was with someone else. The important thing to remember here, Hank, is that she is in trouble and needs our help. I cut him off. What are you telling me, Dad? Who is she traveling with? I yelled into the phone. I was enjoying this a little too much. There was silence, then he cleared his throat. She was traveling with a man, Gary, somebody. He has been arrested too. But again, I cut him off. So you're telling me my wife, your daughter, was flying off to Hawaii with another man while I was out busting my bum to earn a living, and she gets busted for drug possession? Is that what you're telling me? Yes. I'm afraid it is what I'm telling you. I took a long pause. Okay, I need to talk to her lawyer, then this DA agent, and then I'm going to talk to her. After that, we'll go from there. But she better have one hell of an explanation as to why she was about to go to Hawaii with another man and taking drugs with her as well. I hung up on him before he could respond. When I got home, I saw there were over 20 messages waiting, so I began to play them back. The first, as expected, was for me about losing my cell phone. The next few were from Kathy, hoping I would check her messages while I was on my business trip. Several were from her father, and the rest were from her lawyer asking me to get in touch as soon as possible. I called the lawyer, and since he wasn't in the office at that time, I made an appointment for the following morning. Next, I called DA Agent DeFranco and agreed to meet him at his office downtown later that afternoon. I quickly got cleaned up and headed off, all the while trying to think if I had covered my tracks so none of this could come back on me. Soon, I found myself in what I can only assume was an interrogation room. Agent DeFranco walked in carrying a folder. "Glad you were able to stop by and see me. I have some questions about your wife that I was hoping you could answer," he said while reading something from the folder. "Look, my wife isn't into drugs. As long as I've known her, she has never taken anything illegal. Hell, she doesn't even drink that much. This must all be a big misunderstanding or mistake. She's a yoga instructor, for God's sake. Why would she be doing drugs?" I was putting on a little act, but Agent DeFranco never looked up. People do all sorts of stupid things for all sorts of stupid reasons. "Now, did you know your wife was going to Hawaii with this guy Gary? She told us he was just a friend, but Gary said they were going to have a romantic holiday. So, do you know this Gary? Did you know your wife was having an affair? Did you know anything about the drugs?" Now he was looking at me hard. I took a deep breath to calm myself. I didn't know any of it until I talked with my father-in-law this morning. But I still can't believe it. She must have been coerced into doing this. She is too good a person to be involved in anything like this. I didn't want to overplay this. I'm sure this guy could spot someone lying in a heartbeat, so I had to be very careful. He sighed. "No, I guess you didn't know. Well, I hate to break it to you, chum, but your wife was cheating on you with a drug dealer, no less. Now, we've already searched his place and found even more drugs, and soon we'll be searching your home as well. Now, you could cooperate and let us into your house, or it wouldn't take long to get a search warrant. Either way, we'll be there soon to do the search." I knew her lawyer would have said not to, but this was self-preservation, and it would look good that I was not trying to hide anything. So, I agreed, and soon found myself back at the house with dozens of DA and FBI agents and a couple of their dogs looking through my house. They did take a few things, some pill containers she kept in the medicine cabinet. The next day, while I met with Kathy's lawyer, I told him of my meeting with DeFranco and of the search. He was not happy. "If you have any more contact with any law enforcement official, I want to be there before you answer any questions. Do you understand?" I nodded. I was pissed. "Now let me make something clear to you. I want to know everything that has happened that led to my wife being arrested. So far, all I know is that she was about to board a flight to Hawaii with this guy Gary. If you or she wants my help, somebody better tell me how this came to be. Do I make myself clear? You know I can't discuss your wife's case with you." At that point, I walked out. Next, I went to the jail where she was being held and asked to see her. I met her in a room with several other inmates who were meeting either with family or lawyers at round metal tables with stools around them bolted to the floor. I saw her being led in, wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, no makeup, and her hair pulled back into a tight but messy ponytail. She looked as if she hadn't slept in the last few days. "Oh, baby, I'm so glad you're here," she cried. I was about to give her a hug when a guard came over and told us we could have no physical contact. This made her cry even more. "It's okay, baby. We'll get this whole mess sorted out. What I need now is to hear your side of the story. How did you end up about to fly off to Hawaii with this guy?" I said this with no emotion whatsoever. She started to cry even more. Hank, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So, it is true. You were having an affair with this guy Gary, this drug dealer. How could you? Weren't you happy with me? Don't you love me? I don't understand this. I mean, you and him, then there are the drugs. What were you thinking? I waited, but I knew she didn't have an answer. Please believe me when I say I've always loved you. This was just a one-time thing. It didn't mean anything to me. Can you please find it in your heart to forgive me? She was pleading with me now. I looked at her for a long moment, then said, I might have found it in my heart to forgive you, but you shattered it into a million pieces. Therefore, I have no forgiveness for you. When I leave here, I'll be talking to a divorce lawyer, and all the locks will have been changed on the house. I'll have all your clothes and other belongings sent to your parents' place because I want all traces of you removed from my life. I want nothing more to do with you. Oh, and tell that lawyer of yours that he better not use me as a character witness because I'll have nothing good to say about you. Goodbye, Kathy. I hope things work out for you. She was crying her eyes out and begging me not to go, that she needed me. I never turned around but just went straight home and started to pack up her things. I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed the following day. Then I called the security company and arranged to have them come by next week to install their top-of-the-line system. Within a few days, I had most of her stuff packed and ready to be sent to her parents' house. I'd also received and ignored several calls from Kathy wanting to talk. As far as I was concerned, she could go to hell. Finally, I was able to return to work, and we were able to sign those big clients we had been pursuing. Soon, I had my promotion and the pay raise that came with it. I was able to divorce Kathy with little trouble, as it was a straight-up 50-50 split with no alimony, and with her footing the bill for her legal fees from her drug arrest. She kept trying to get in touch with me, but I wanted to put some distance between us. Now, she never went to trial as the evidence was so overwhelming that her lawyers said she couldn't win. It was in her best interest to take a plea deal and get a shorter sentence. She was not happy, to say the least. Gary, on the other hand, fought tooth and nail to try and prove his innocence. The dumb bastard was sent up for 15 years, whereas Kathy only got 5 years. It was the day of Kathy's sentencing, and she had asked to see me one last time before she started serving her sentence. I agreed, and we met at her lawyer's office an hour before she was due in court. She looked at me, and I could see she had been crying. Hank, I just wanted you to know that Gary didn't mean a thing to me. It was you I loved and always will love. I'm so sorry I hurt you like this. It was never meant to be this way. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday. She was on the verge of tears again. Kathy, I want to know one thing. Why were you bored? Did I disappoint you in bed? Was it the thrill of doing something wrong and getting away with it? What made you do this and destroy our marriage? I said sadly. She looked at me. I don't really know why. I guess it was the excitement of doing something wrong. But I always loved you. Apparently, you didn't love me enough, or you would have never done this in the first place. Kathy, I hope this will be the last time that I ever have to deal with you. But I never want to see or hear from you again. I also want you to spend your time in prison thinking about just how much you've lost, all because you wanted a little excitement in your life. I'm guessing you're going to have some exciting times behind bars once those ladies see your tight little bum. She started to cry again, but this time out of fear. Over the next few years, the company grew, and I worked my way up to a VP position. The business expanded, and we now had an office in New York. I was chosen to head it up. This meant selling my house, moving to Manhattan, and getting an apartment. Early on, I had received a few letters from Kathy but sent them back unopened. That was a part of my life I wanted to put behind me and move on. It has been 7 years now, and my life in New York was good. I was still single, dating a different woman every few months. I had no desire to get married and put myself at risk of being betrayed again. Once was enough. I was sitting in my office when a call from the lobby came in, and my administrative assistant, Amy, came in. There's a woman downstairs wanting to speak to you. She says her name is Kathy. I paused for a moment. have her shown up, but have 2 security guards standing by. Also, I have something I want you to do for me. I wrote something down and handed it to Amy. A few minutes later, Kathy was in my office. She looked at least 10 years older and had put on some weight, but not in a good way. Her once beautiful long brown hair now showed some gray and was frizzy. I could see the bags under her eyes, which were sadly looking. The clothes she wore were stylish but conservative and a bit dated. I looked at her but felt nothing. Not love, not hate, not even pity. I was just empty of emotion. "So, Kathy, what do you want?" I asked. "Hank, I was hoping to talk to you." I felt the need to set the record straight about what happened to me. You see, I had no idea about the drugs, and I still don't know how they got into my bags. Gary must have sneaked them in when I wasn't looking. I'm not a drug user and never have been. "Please believe me," she pleaded. "Kathy, you threw away our marriage for a fling and made our whole marriage a lie. Why should I believe you now? Why is it so important that you felt the need to track me down and tell me another lie? You don't understand. I love you. I still love you. I want you back. I want us to be together again," she continued. Just then, the phone on my desk rang, and I put it on speaker. "Yes, Amy, what is it?" "Stacy called to confirm that you should get 4 tickets for the opening, as her parents are coming into town and they want to meet you. Let her know that I'll buy 4 tickets. Oh, and find out where her parents are staying. I'd like to send her mother a dozen roses." I ended the call and turned back to Kathy. "You were saying?" Kathy was on the verge of tears. "Who is Stacy?" "Oh, just some woman I've been dating for a while. But you're not here to discuss my love life. You were telling me you still love me. I'm flattered, but you should know I do not love you anymore. The day your father told me you were arrested and about to fly off to Hawaii with Gary as soon as your infidelity was exposed, I was done with you. Now please leave, and I never want to see you again. Do you understand me?" I looked hard at her. But I had nothing to do with those drugs they found. I was set up. Gary must have. I slammed my hand down on my desk. "Kathy, enough with your lies. You were screwing around on me. You lied to me then, and you're lying to me now. Just stop it. I don't believe you, and I never will. I think it's time you left, and please don't come back. I've instructed security that if you ever show up here again, they should have you arrested. Do I make myself clear?" She was silently crying but nodded her head. I led her to the door and had the 2 security guards escort her out of the building. Amy came in after she left. "What was that all about?" "Oh, that was just me saying goodbye to a great time." Story 2. Everyone's life goes differently because everyone has their own character, habits, and beliefs. And every day a person decides for himself how to arrange his life when he makes this or that choice. Much can depend on this choice, or maybe nothing special, but still, every choice, even insignificant, affects how their destiny will unfold. My story begins in the distant past when it was time for me to go through life not alone. I was young then, and had a lot of fun. I dated girls, partied at gatherings. And then it happened that I fell in love with a girl, Marianne, and we dated for several months. But life turned in a way that we had to part ways. She was more dedicated to her studies than her personal life and soon moved to another state. At first, I waited for her, wrote to her, called her. But after some time, she replied that she was completely devoted to her future profession and didn't know when she could come back to me. I remember getting really drunk, and at the bar where I was, I met another girl who was 4 years younger than me. Lisa appealed to me immediately. She even resembled Marianne in some way. The first memory that marked the beginning of our relationship was when the next morning, she made me broth and an aspirin so that I wouldn't suffer from a terrible hangover. 25 years have passed since then. Naturally, Lisa and I got married, and we have a wonderful daughter. I can't say that our family life was perfect. But still, I couldn't complain about how we spent our time, although over the years, there were many instances when Lisa was freaking me out. Our daughter Anna got married and moved to live with her husband, and Lisa and I remained alone. But our life didn't become dull because of that. From time to time, we visited friends, or they came to us for a barbecue or just to chat over dinner on weekends. Kurt and Ruby were among our closest friends. We've known them for a long time, and they were also witnesses at our wedding. We used to meet with them most often. And now they invited us to join them for a small celebration at their country house, where they planned to have a pleasant evening before embarking on a short trip. There weren't many guests, but this time not all of them were familiar to us. However, it didn't prevent us from fully immersing ourselves in the pleasant atmosphere and enjoying the party. Lisa even quickly met a few of her old acquaintances there, with whom she studied together, but they had since dispersed and hadn't seen each other for a long time. She left me alone and went to greet them. Kurt came up to me and kept me company, noticing that I had been standing with a glass in my hand and watching what was happening for a couple of minutes. "Today turned out to be a pretty good evening, don't you think?" he asked me. Ruby made an effort. She organized everything herself. "Yeah. Not bad. But I see some unfamiliar people here." "Who are they?" "I haven't seen them before." "Oh, those are Ruby's friends from years back. She decided to invite them herself. Apparently, she wanted to show off to her former classmates how well she's settled. Not everyone would go celebrate a 20th wedding anniversary on a cruise." "That's true," I confirmed. "Come on, I'll introduce you to the others. They're great guys." "You'll see," Kurt suggested, and I followed him since I had nothing else to do at the moment. I'll admit, deep down, I even envied him a bit because I wasn't as fortunate with my job, and I had an average salary. But still, we had enough for life and basic necessities. However, I also wanted to arrange some nice vacation for Lisa and me on our anniversary, which was coming up in a few months, so lately, I had been taking extra shifts and slowly saving up. That same evening, I enjoyed drinks and snacks. Kurt didn't let me get bored. However, after a few hours, when the fun was in full swing, I noticed that I hadn't seen my wife for some time. Not that I was specifically keeping an eye on her, but I wanted to sit with her and discuss some things. But it seemed like Lisa had vanished into thin air. First, thinking she might have gone to the ladies' room, I decided to wait. But after some time had passed, I realized she wasn't around. So, I started wandering through the rooms and the yard outside, hoping to see her chatting away with some women about various things. But my search yielded no results. I even felt a twinge of jealousy, remembering how in her youth, she used to flirt with other guys, which used to annoy me greatly. But she assured me it was just her nature, and she never cheated on me. Over the years, I thought that was all in the past, and I hoped that at this age, she wouldn't dare such madness. Kurt noticed that I seemed a bit puzzled and upset, although I tried not to show it. He approached me when I returned to the room with the buffet table. "Hey buddy, something up with you?" he asked, smiling. "No," I replied. "Nothing special. Just wanted to see my wife, can't find her. Probably chatting away with her girlfriends somewhere." "Most likely. Mine loves to chat for hours. I don't even know what you can talk about for so long." "Well, we're planning to light a bonfire and sit with marshmallows, like in our younger days. You in?" Kurt offered. I hesitated for a moment. It wasn't a bad idea, but for some reason, I wasn't in the mood, so I politely declined. Kurt wished me luck and went off on his own. I just wanted to sit and rest for a bit. My health wasn't what it used to be, and the years had taken their toll. But when I got to the cozy chair, I felt that the amount of alcohol I'd already drunk had gotten me pretty hungover, and I decided to go to wash my face. In the restroom, after splashing my face a few times with cold water from the tap, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Staring back at me was a man of considerable age, gaining some weight and lined with wrinkles. But deep down, I always wanted to feel young. I never used to pay much attention to myself in such detail before. I washed up, got dressed, and was ready. But this time, I felt fixated on my reflection, as if it wanted to convey something to me. Momentarily lost in thought, I suddenly noticed in the mirror that someone was standing behind me. Not beside me, but in the far corner. It was the silhouette of a woman, staring intently at me. I turned sharply, but found no one else in the room. And why would a woman be in the men's restroom? I turned back to the mirror, and this time, there was no one there but me. I was never superstitious and didn't believe in the supernatural. Thinking it was just a trick of the alcohol, I washed my face again and headed for the exit. I intended to find that comfortable chair again and sit for a while. But as I exited the restroom and entered the corridor, I noticed that the light there had dimmed slightly. Thinking it was probably for energy-saving purposes, I continued. Yet, something strange caught my attention again. At the end of the hallway, I saw the same silhouette of a woman, and now she stood silently, pointing to one of the doors, extending her hand forward. I don't know why, but I walked in the direction she indicated. And when I reached the door, the stranger vanished as if into thin air. However, I was already there and decided to find out what she wanted to show me. Slowly, I cracked the door open, and when I peered inside the room, shock completely immobilized my body. I saw two people making love on a wide bed. The woman was on top, her back to me. I don't know if she heard me or just sensed it, but she slowly began to turn. And when I saw her face, I was even more horrified and disappointed. It was Lisa. Seeing me, she didn't stop but continued what she was doing, rocking back and forth on some guy, and even gave me a sinister smile. I felt a sharp pain in my heart, so intense. Everything even blurred in my eyes for a moment. But it passed in an instant, and I found myself sitting in the chair I had chosen for my rest. Realizing it was just a foolish dream I briefly sunk into, I decided to call it quits with alcohol for the night. Yet, something inside me still felt uneasy and urged me to go and check that very room I had seen in my dream. It didn't take me long, and soon, I was standing at that door. I heard someone inside for sure, but for some reason, I felt a little scared. For about a minute, I stood by the door, hearing moans and laughter, a woman's laughter, emanating from within. I knew that if I didn't go in and check, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. So, I pushed the door open. There wasn't any big bed there, just a small room with a small couch and a few nightstands. And I didn't spot anyone. But then who was laughing? I thought. For a moment, all voices ceased, and I started listening. Soon, I heard a rustle from the far corner. I took a step and entered the room. There was a wide armchair in the corner, and there I saw Lisa with a guy, shirtless with black wavy hair cascading over his shoulders, behaving rather freely with him. The top sweater she was no longer wearing, and she leaned back against the arm of the man who had spread her across the back of the chair. When she noticed me, she instantly regained her senses and assumed a more respectable pose. Lisa realized she was in an awkward situation and even blushed slightly. "I don't understand," I said in a serious, rough voice. "Rick, what are you doing?" "We were just chatting," Lisa started chattering. "This is Steven. We studied together. We were reminiscing about the old days." I glanced from head to toe at this guy, who continued sitting in the same relaxed pose, glancing at me as if I'd interrupted something crucial. "So, that's why you hid here, like. Look at yourself," I continued addressing my wife. "Where's your clothing? What were you both doing here, anyway?" At this point, Steven stood up, adjusted his black leather pants by tugging at the belt, and took a step toward me. He was a head taller than I initially thought, now looking down at me. "Didn't they tell you?" "Remembering the old days." "What, feeling feeble already, old man?" He leaned slightly toward me. I began to piece together what he meant and that they weren't just chatting. Everything indicated they either had already been intimate or were about to be. Without much thought, I shoved him, and he sharply landed back on the chair. Lisa got scared and hurriedly got up. "Rick, have you gone mad? What's gotten into you?" she shouted. I didn't have time to answer her, because Steven was up again, ready to attack me back. He was a little younger than I was, and so was Lisa. And that gave him some physical advantage. But I wasn't going to back down because his actions only confirmed that there was something between him and Lisa. Without waiting for him to strike first, I kicked him hard under the knee, and while he grimaced in pain, I slammed my fist into his jaw, sending him back into the chair, his back falling against it. "Rick, what are you doing?" Lisa continued to howl. "You tell me. What have you been doing here?" "A friend, you said?" "I believed you. Why have you fucked him yet?" "No. Before she could respond, Stephen regained himself and lunged at me. We grappled for a while. Lisa kept screaming, demanding that we stop. It seemed our commotion attracted Kurt's attention, as he appeared in the room and, seeing us fighting like schoolboys, rushed to break it up. But we had already backed off from each other, and Kurt didn't have to exert much effort. Stephen looked at everyone angrily, then picked up his shirt from the floor and headed for the exit, catching me with his shoulder. "What happened here? What haven't you shared?" Kurt asked. "Nothing. We're leaving," I replied sharply, grabbing my wife's arm and dragging her along. I didn't care how the guests looked at us as I left with her, pulling her by the arm. When we got into the car, she started yelling at me, accusing me of acting foolishly and embarrassing her in front of friends. I was about to turn the ignition key when her babbling started getting to me. So, I reached out with my other hand and slapped her. As I expected, that helped, and she fell silent for a while. "Whore," I uttered, starting the engine. She remained silent the entire way home, not even attempting to justify herself. And I didn't ask. Only when we were already home did she decide to start a fight with me. We argued for a long time, shouting at each other. She even threw dishes. I kept pressing her, trying to get the truth out of her. For some reason, it was crucial to me then. Finally, she gave in. Maybe she was tired of justifying herself, or it was just a burst of nerves, but she admitted to having a brief intimate encounter with Stephen. She told me that when they were young, they had met and even loved each other shortly before meeting me, but had broken up over a small matter. And now that they'd met again, it was as if something had pushed them together, and they'd given in to their newfound feelings. "I'm sorry, Rick. But it's your own fault," she said when we were both tired of arguing and sitting in separate chairs, looking at each other. "You've become just a regular old grump these last few years. I'm a woman. I need love, I need affection. And that's why you decided instead of talking to me about it, you'd just jump into bed with someone else? Slut." I got up and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" "It's nighttime," Lisa asked. "What the fuck do you care?" I replied rudely and walked out of the house. I needed to be alone. Lisa had hurt me terribly with her behavior. She and I weren't perfect, but I didn't think this would ever happen. My thoughts at that moment were so clouded that I didn't even consider where to go, just away. Sitting behind the wheel, I started the engine and hit the gas pedal hard. The car screeched and raced down the dark road. Road lamps and trees flickered past me, faintly illuminated by them, but all I could see was that moment when Lisa was embracing and kissing that jerk in the dimly lit room. I felt so disgusted and sick that I wanted to vomit. And a moment later, I realized that this feeling wasn't just because of dark thoughts. Stopping by the roadside, I clumsily stumbled out of the car and, dropping to my knees, emptied everything left in my stomach onto the asphalt. Feeling some relief, I got back into the car. Damn it, I cursed and drove on. After wandering the city for a while, I stopped at a bar that was still open. I wanted to drink again, hoping that alcohol would at least momentarily make me forget about the episode that happened in my life. However, after a few rounds, I realized it was only making things worse. The soft music and dim lighting did relax me a bit, and I began to feel drowsy. At one point, I thought I'd go sit behind the wheel, speed up, and let fate decide, considering I'd lost the person to whom I had given so many years of love and tenderness. Then I remembered my daughter. Anna was still in my life, always supporting me when she was around. No. For Anna's sake, I reconsidered committing a reckless act. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned and saw a police officer beside me. But he wasn't in uniform anymore. He smiled at me and sat down next to me. It was my friend, who worked in the police force and somehow ended up in the same bar as me. "What are you doing here at this late hour?" Chuck asked. I sighed heavily, unsure whether to tell him the truth about my sorrow or just lie, saying I decided to take a walk in the middle of the night. "Hey, Chuck." "Yeah, just passing by," I replied. "Judging by your mood, something's happened to you. Don't want to share?" he asked. "Yeah. Something happened," I sighed again. "Had an argument with the wife." He ordered himself a drink, whispered something to the bartender, then turned to me again. "I understand. I don't always get along with mine either. It's life. Hope everything will be okay for you. Here, take this coffee, drink it," he said as the cup arrived on the counter. "You look really bad. I wouldn't want you to pass out on the road somewhere." I picked up the tiny handle of the cup with my fingers and brought it to my lips. After a small sip that tasted bitter, I put the cup back. Chuck started chatting about trivial things, trying to distract me from sad thoughts. Then he offered me a ride. He was surprised that I came here in my car and scolded me for driving in such a state. But I refused and said I'd take a taxi. Besides, I wasn't particularly interested in hearing his sermons and advice about family relationships, which he started giving me during our conversation. I was about to bid him goodbye, but Chuck persisted, maybe because he was used to controlling and maintaining order over the years, or perhaps genuinely concerned about me, and said he wouldn't rest until he saw me getting into a taxi. As we headed for the exit, while he kept murmuring something to me, I noticed a woman heading deeper into the place. It seemed like I knew her and decided to follow her to dispel my doubts. The woman was almost at the women's restroom when I stopped her, grabbing her elbow. She turned around and asked me what I wanted. "Sorry. Looks like I made a mistake," I apologized and let go of her arm. For a moment, I thought I saw Marianne, the one I once loved. But then I wondered why she would be here, in such a place. I read articles in newspapers and online that she had become an outstanding professor over these years, completely immersed in the world of science. However, for over a year, I hadn't come across any information about her, although I hadn't deliberately followed her life. But now, I found myself pondering. For some reason, I wanted to find her, see her again, and at least talk like old friends. Chuck settled me in a taxi and sent me to the address. I got home when Lisa was already asleep. Without turning on the overhead light, I went to the living room and sat on the couch. All the events from the previous evening, the alcohol, and the unsettling thoughts slowly detached me from reality, and I, closing my eyes, drifted off, without even realizing it. In the morning, Lisa woke me up. I heard her footsteps. Last night, she noticed I was sleeping on the couch and covered me with a blanket. Now, she decided to make coffee for me, and she brought it into the room, placing it on the table nearby. I rubbed my eyes, looked at her. She was acting so nonchalantly that it seemed like nothing happened last night. However, I remembered everything and now didn't understand why she was behaving like that. "Listen, Rick," she started, sitting down next to me and putting her hands on her knees. "I understand that something unpleasant happened yesterday. I myself don't know what got into me. It was probably a mistake. Just..." "What?" I felt the indignation inside me again. I sat up abruptly. "And you're talking about it so calmly? You fucking fucked another man right under my nose. And now you're just saying it was a mistake?" Anger began to cloud my thoughts again, but I didn't yet know how to deal with this woman. However, she herself gave me a hint when she continued. "You see, I tried to apologize to you. But you're growling again, not even giving me a chance to make amends." "Make amends?" What can be fixed now? You've already done it. How do you plan to fix it now? Rick. I talked to Steven this morning. She paused briefly. He offered me to move in with him. I didn't know what to say before. But now I do. I see that you won't forgive me. And that's why I've decided to agree. After all, he still loves me. I couldn't believe my ears. We spent so many years together. She often told me she loved me, and now it turns out it was all deception, and she never really had sincere feelings for me. But why now, after all these years? What was she waiting for? Lisa placed her hand on my knee, as if trying to cheer me up in an unpleasant situation. But it seemed so repulsive to me, and with each of her words, my anger only grew. I couldn't bear it and struck her across the face, this time so hard that she groaned in pain. I stood up and paced the room, trying to control my emotions, so as not to strangle this wretch. Lisa, recovering from the pain of the blow, turned her head towards me again, then stood up and said, "You know what? You're simply unbearable. We shouldn't have gotten married in the first place," she said and left the room. Soon, she was heading for the exit with a suitcase, apparently packed before she even sat down to talk to me. Obviously, her decision had already been made then, and she was just trying to feign decency. I was left alone. Several days had passed since Lisa left home. During this time, she never showed up again and never called me. Anna came to see me. She sometimes visited us on weekends, and I had to tell her the unpleasant truth about her mother. For her, this news was shocking too. And that day, she even stayed overnight to support me. But, however it was, life went on. I resigned myself to Lisa's choice. However, now thoughts of Marianne began to visit me more and more frequently. And I decided to find her. The only thing I regretted now was that I decided to do it so late. I should have left everything and followed her many years ago. I didn't know how our life would have turned out, but I was sure that this woman would never betray me for anything. I started searching the internet for anything that could indicate where she might be now. The last information I found about her was that Marianne conducted a conference in Boston a year ago. And I began to prepare for the trip. Just then, my daughter dropped by again to check on me, as I had been having heart problems lately, and she was worried about me. But I convinced her that I was fine and that I was just visiting a friend. I didn't tell her that I was going to another state in search of an elusive love, knowing that Anna would try to dissuade me to the point of staying with me and keeping an eye on me. As I was leaving the city, I accidentally glanced out the passenger side window and noticed the two people I now hated driving in the next lane. Steven and Lisa were heading somewhere and looked quite cheerful and happy. I slowed down a bit to be a little behind them, not wanting to be noticed. For some reason, I became curious about where they were going. Although I had my own goal, I still followed them. After a while, I noticed they were heading towards a dense forest. I didn't know what guided me then, but I kept following them. And as I drove, that image kept coming back to me, where she was with that. Oh, if I could, I would have ended both of them right there. Anger, resentment, and disappointment pushed me toward those thoughts and desires. But I understood how it could end if I decided to take this step. However, a little later, I noticed that they were turning onto a small meadow. I slowed down further, hiding the car behind dense bushes, and started watching what they wanted to do. Except for us, there was no one else there, only birds chirping occasionally, and I could hear something of what they were saying. And I realized that they had decided to camp for the night. What happened next? I couldn't just watch it, so I went back to the car, because I could have snapped out of it and thrown myself on both of them. Although I understood that our marriage with Lisa was already in the past, the resentment for her actions still lingered in me. And I was also angry at Steven, who behaved so brazenly. As if I had taken something from him, and now he decided to take it back. Something took over me that day. I clearly understood my thoughts and actions, but on the other hand, it was as if I wasn't in control of my body. And anger spread through me like black smoke. Waiting for darkness, I approached their camp again. I saw that they were already finishing a bottle of wine and, quite drunk, engaging in debauchery by the fire. Something pricked my heart again. And I was afraid that my inner organ would fail me at the most inappropriate moment, and I would lie here lifeless in the bushes until someone accidentally found my body, and I wouldn't get a chance to settle the score with the scoundrels. But the pain soon passed. I saw Lisa and Steven getting into the tent. For some time, they were fumbling there, and then silence fell. And I decided not to wait any longer. Getting closer to their tent, I first listened. Steven was already snoring like a wild boar. The entrance to the tent was slightly open, and I cautiously looked inside. Lisa was lying, throwing her leg and arm over Steven, also fast asleep. I was even surprised that his snoring didn't disturb her sleep, whereas she used to constantly bother me and wake me up when I started snoring. But it didn't bother me much now. A cunning thought came to my mind, and I decided to act as my gut advised me at that moment. The fire was still burning weakly, and approaching it, I took out one of the sticks from there, burning at one end, and returned to the tent. Before that, I noticed that when the lovers were setting it up, they firmly nailed its ends to the ground so that it wouldn't accidentally blow away in the wind, even though there was no wind as such. However, it came in handy for me, and I approached the entrance. There I poured the remains of alcohol from the bottle, which was also lying by the fire, and then without hesitation threw my makeshift torch inside. I immediately took a few steps back and hid behind the nearest tree. And then I watched from hiding what was happening next. The fire didn't keep me waiting and quickly engulfed the tent with its hot tongues. I was waiting for these two to wake up and be horrified by what was happening. Yes, I wanted to scare them thoroughly, so that they would remember it for the rest of their lives. I hoped it would make me feel better. However, time passed, and there was no sign of movement from their tent. And then I understood that they were probably so drunk that they didn't feel the heat surrounding them, and now, perhaps, they had breathed in smoke and couldn't wake up because of it. At some point, I even regretted my actions. Because however much I wanted to punish them, in fact, I simply killed two sleeping people. But suddenly there was a scream. Both of them were screaming. However, the fire had already so engulfed the tent that they simply had no opportunity to escape from there. I even wanted to rush to their aid. But how to extinguish it now? Yes, there was a small fire extinguisher in the car. But it was several dozen meters away, and no matter how fast I rushed, I wouldn't have made it anyway. And now all I could do was watch as they pushed the tent walls with their hands and screamed frantically. And when the fire had already made holes in the tent, I saw the burning people throwing themselves to the ground, trying to put out their blazing bodies. But I understood that I acted cruelly towards them. But, on the other hand, I even felt relieved. After all, this woman had been my companion for many years, and I tried to give her only my best feelings. I gave her all the love that I couldn't give to Marianne, and she treated me so unfairly. And here I was again, out in the clearing, looking at the charred bodies. The fire burned everything I could touch, and now it all looked like an unfortunate accident, especially since Steven was a smoker, and the police could easily think they fell asleep without putting out a cigarette. I left everything as it was and drove away from that place. Speeding further down the road, far away from that clearing, I felt sleep starting to overpower me. So, I pulled over to the side and decided to nap for a bit. This time I dreamed of Marianne, dressed all in white, almost shining. I found myself with her in a white room, and she stood in front of me, smiling, holding my hand. Strangely, in all these years, she never appeared in my dreams. And now, here she was. When I woke up, I saw that it was already dawn. I tried to push aside the events of the previous night from my thoughts, knowing it was over with them, and now I headed towards where I had originally planned to go. After some time, I managed to reach Boston. There, I needed to make quite an effort to find Marianne. It was as if someone from above helped me find her. I discovered her in the hospital. When I entered the hospital room where she lay in an unconscious state, the doctor told me that she had been in a coma for a year since she got into an accident. I approached her and took her hand. "Marianne, forgive me. I shouldn't have given up. Just wake up," I whispered to her. I gazed at her pale face, and for a moment, it even seemed to me that she opened her eyes and smiled at me. but she continued to lie unconscious. I stayed with her until evening, but then the doctor said it was time for me to leave. And as I was at the door, I heard a faint voice. "Rick." At first, I thought I just imagined it, and I didn't immediately turn around. But she repeated my name again. And then I rushed to her in tears. I can't remember ever crying like that, but I was incredibly happy that she called my name again and that after so many years, she recognized me. The doctor, who saw this, just shrugged. Later, the doctors examined Marianne and said that some kind of miracle had happened because they themselves had lost hope that she would ever return to life. I stayed with her, moving in. Marianne accepted me, confessing that all these years she continued to love me, but upon learning that I got married, she simply didn't want to destroy my marriage. And the house where I used to live was left to my daughter and grandchildren. I still couldn't stay there anymore because everything reminded me of betrayal.